Hello everyone and welcome to another video, and what is another episode of But Can It Run... insert game title here. In this series we take older, fairly easy to run games, give them a graphical overhaul using mods, and then see how well they run in comparison to the unchanged or vanilla game. Why do we do this? Well, because we can. Plus, it gives you the chance to see how graphical changes impact the performance of certain titles. If you haven't guessed it already, today we're looking back at Mafia 2. Now almost 10 years old, Mafia 2 was very well received on release, and honestly, I think it still holds up today in terms of both gameplay and graphical quality, though it's always felt a little clunky. As expected, this game will run at the absolute highest settings with anti-aliasing enabled at 4K resolution on a lot of modern hardware. At 1080p or lower, it will be an even smoother experience and will run on a wider range of components. It's no surprise considering the recommended graphics card is a 9800 GTX from Nvidia or an AMD HD 3870, both of which will handle the game with at least 30 FPS and a mixture of settings. Anything newer will run even better. For example, let's take a look at how an old workstation card, the Fire Pro W5000, handles the game. This AMD GPU dates back to 2012 and was never intended for gaming purposes, but even it will manage a solid gameplay experience. I also couldn't resist seeing how a once flagship GTX 480 handled the game. After all, this was one of the best cards available when Mafia 2 came out. Once again, it's no surprise that things are running very well despite the GPU's urge to catch fire. But if you want something more from Mafia 2 in 2020, you might want to give it a visual overhaul, as well as improve some of the little annoyances that never really got ironed out by the developers. Well, that's where modding comes into play, and thankfully, one mod I found takes care of a lot of small issues. Now, just like all of these videos, the end result is totally subjective. Some of you might think the game is improved, and some of you may think the game looks worse. All I know is the following changes sure will affect performance from what I've tested. So let's take another quick look around Empire Bay before changing anything. To me, Mafia 2's unique style means it's instantly recognisable. It's not the best looking game in the world, and this has always been the case, but that doesn't mean it isn't a good looking game. To me, what set it apart was the storytelling. A story that in some ways was like playing a film with some great supporting characters to back up Vito as the star of the show, even if some of said characters did have questionable taste in furniture and decor. This screenshot brings us on to the mods. Today I'm using QT Mod's Old Time Reality mod, a recent release that is still being worked on, which is always nice to hear, as it means there will only be more and more added in the future. The reason I like this mod is because not only does it make changes to the way the game looks, but it makes subtle changes to other aspects like the camera field of view and the amount of ammo you can pick up, for example. Primarily though, it's things like the new weather effects, new lighting and rewritten post-effect settings that make the biggest difference, and the texture alterations are a welcome improvement in my opinion too. Here are a couple of comparative clips that highlight the differences side by side. Here's the opening scene of Chapter 2, where Vito returns home and walks through the old neighbourhood on the way to his family's home. The original still looks excellent, and when using a modern GPU like the 5700 XT, you can expect to see over 100 FPS in some cases, though there are certainly still some dips here and there, which is why the 4GB patcher is an essential tool to install as well, especially after installing any mods. If we switch to the old-time reality footage, you can see that the colours and lighting effects stand out more here, and the textures are sharper overall, and have been totally replaced in some places. As always, I'd recommend playing through any game in its vanilla state first time round to fully appreciate them the way the developers intended, then messing around with mods afterwards. I apologise for the small frame rate counter in the top left corner as well as the usage figures, but I can tell you that with this mod installed, our frame rate was cut in half. Here's a look at another comparison, this time inside a hotel. First of all, we have the vanilla footage, which again looks great. The biggest noticeable change the mod brings here is the way the light comes in through the windows and brightens up the walls. Again, we find our frame rate not quite hitting 60, and there are a few drops to the mid-40s, sometimes even lower. It still feels very smooth overall though. Personally, I think this mod works best when it comes to the game's snow-covered winter segment or during rainstorms, though the impact on frame rate will be apparent regardless. Interiors also benefit from the overhaul too, as you previously saw in the hotel level. I couldn't get rid of the minimap and could find no working link to any mods that would remove it, otherwise I would have done that as well. So we know that with this mod installed we can still run the game with at least 30 FPS at 4K, touching 60 in some cases, but that is with a relatively new and powerful graphics card. So what about with our previously tested older GPUs, the GTX 480 from Nvidia and AMD's FirePro W5000? Well, first, it's the 480. This will average about 42 FPS with the high settings at 1080p resolution. After turning off anti-aliasing, we saw an improvement in this figure, but it will mean that an increase can be seen in jagged edges around objects, which are apparent anyway at this resolution, so there's no point increasing the amount of jagged edges on things. This game is more than playable, but you have to ask yourself whether the changes are worth the performance loss. Obviously, if you prefer the vanilla game over the modded game, then the sacrifice won't be worth it anyway. With the FirePro W5000, we were seeing only 30 FPS with the settings turned right up, and this dipped into the mid-20s on occasion. This mod seems to have more of an impact on the game using this GPU, but I do believe this is an Nvidia optimized title. That shouldn't be the sole cause of poor performance, but it's worth mentioning nonetheless, as if you have an older AMD card, you may see a few problems. Make sure with aforementioned Nvidia cards the PhysX is off too, as this can have a significant impact on the overall frame rate. Overall, these graphical changes will likely impact performance as expected, but how much performance loss you see will totally depend on the graphics card that you use, and the CPU of course. But even if you were seeing 60 FPS with the vanilla game, then you should still get 30 or more after these changes, and on some hardware it may not make that much of a difference, especially if you turn anti-aliasing off or just reduce the settings overall, though doing that does defeat the object of a mod like this in some ways. The best thing to do is to try it for yourself and see how well it works for you. I'll leave a link to the mod in the description below. Now, I know this isn't our usual style of video. I like to make these but can it run videos every so often because I like to do the occasional mod showcase just to see how well older games hold up when they receive a little bit of a visual overhaul, as well as seeing how well they perform on certain hardware. They aren't for everybody, as I mentioned before, but anyone looking to give a different style to certain older titles, whether that's better or just different, then I'd certainly recommend trying things like this out, as it may be worth it if you want a slightly different experience with games that you've played many times in the past beforehand. I would like to reiterate though that playing through your games collection in their vanilla style is always the best way to start, because you get to experience them how the developers initially intended. Unless of course you need mods to fix what is otherwise a broken game, and there are certainly a few of those titles about. Anyway, thank you for watching. Let me just leave you with a little video clip of me driving around in the summer season with this mod installed, because I don't think it looks as good as the game does in the winter months or when it's raining or during a snowstorm, but I wanted to throw this in here anyway just so you get a good idea of how the game looks under different scenarios. You can see the new road textures and the new weather enhancements here too. I personally prefer the vanilla look when it comes to the sunnier side of the game, but that's just me and it's entirely up to you as to your personal preferences. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I'll be back with another piece of hardware testing in the next one.